I was secretly making $500,000. When my husband demanded a divorce, he said he didn't want an unemployed wife anymore. I was quietly earning $500,000 when my husband asked me for a divorce because, in his words, he could no longer stay married to a woman with no ambition. Grant placed the papers beside my coffee one morning without even looking up from his phone. "I need a partner who actually wants something from life," he said. "Not a stay-at-home wife who spends all day playing with crayons." He said it with the flat confidence of a man who believed he had already measured my worth and found it lacking. I looked at the papers, then at the professional illustrations set on the far end of the kitchen table. Those crayons had cost nearly $400. The drawing tablet beside them had been paid for with my own money. Grant had walked past both of them for years without once asking what I was making. I could have corrected him. I could have told him that, for the previous 6 years, I had been publishing children's books under the pen name E.L. Hart. I could have told him that my books were selling internationally, that the royalties from the previous year alone had reached $200,000, and that I was finalizing a streaming agreement worth another $300,000 upfront. Instead, I picked up the pen and signed every page. The decision surprised even me, but only for a moment. Grant did not want the truth about me. He wanted a version of me that justified what he had already decided to do. Explaining my success would not have repaired the fact that he had never been curious enough to see it. It would only have changed the financial calculation behind his departure. So I signed where his lawyer had marked the pages, slid the papers back across the table, and watched him relax. He thought my silence meant defeat. In reality, it was the first boundary I had drawn in years. The divorce moved quickly because neither of us contested it. I protected my publishing income and intellectual property through the proper disclosures, but I did not turn the process into a public spectacle. Grant remained so uninterested in the details of my work that he never understood the scale of what I had built. By the time the divorce was finalized, he still believed I had spent our marriage drifting through an expensive hobby. 2 weeks later, he moved in with Brooke, my former college roommate. Brooke had once envied nearly everything about my life: my apartment, my car, the stability of my marriage, even the way people seemed comfortable around me. Over time, that envy had learned how to smile. She had stayed close enough to study my life and, eventually, to step into it. By the end, she had 2 of the 3 things she used to talk about wanting. She had Grant. And she had the house he and I had shared. They bought it as part of the post-divorce arrangement and started presenting it as the beginning of their new life together. Grant never changed the locks. I still had a key, but I never used it. I had no interest in sneaking through rooms that no longer belonged to me just to prove I could. Petty revenge would have tied me to a life I was already leaving behind. I moved into a downtown penthouse with floor-to-ceiling windows, a quiet office, and enough natural light to turn one room into a proper studio. Then I returned to work on my 7th book. For 3 months, Grant and I barely spoke. I met deadlines, reviewed illustration drafts, joined contract calls, and learned how peaceful a home could feel when no one was dismissing the work being done inside it. Then, one Saturday at exactly 6:04 in the morning, my phone buzzed. Grant's name appeared on the screen. His message read, "Can you take Sophie today? Brooke has a spa appointment and I have to work, please." Sophie was his 6-year-old daughter from his first marriage. During our marriage, I had helped raise her, packed her lunches, sat beside her through fevers, attended school events, and learned how she liked the crusts cut from her sandwiches. Now, Grant was asking me to babysit on what he called my free weekend, so that the woman he had left me for could keep a spa appointment. The audacity was almost impressive. Still, Sophie had not betrayed me. She had not chosen any of the adults' decisions, and I had never stopped caring about her. I agreed. A few hours later, she arrived with a unicorn backpack, a crooked ponytail, and the guarded expression children wear when they know the adults around them are tense but do not understand why. We made chocolate chip pancakes. She laughed when flour landed on my cheek, and for the first time since the divorce, the penthouse sounded like a home instead of a beautiful, silent workspace. After breakfast, she reached into her backpack and pulled out a book. It was mine, the newest E.L. Hart release, published only weeks earlier and already sitting at number 1 on the New York Times children's list. Sophie studied the author name on the cover, then looked up at me. "Aunt Claire," she said slowly, "do you know this author? She has part of your name." I kept my expression calm, although my pulse quickened. There was no point lying to her when the connection was already in front of her. "That is my pen name, sweetheart," I said. Her eyes widened. "You're E.L. Hart? The E.L. Hart?" When I nodded, her mouth fell open. Then she said something so unexpected that I had to press my lips together to keep from laughing. "Brooke talks about you all the time. She says you're the biggest children's author right now. She bought all your books last month." According to Sophie, Brooke had arranged them on the coffee table, told visitors she was obsessed with the series, printed an author photograph from the internet, and stuck it on the refrigerator in the house that used to be mine. The irony was almost too perfect. Brooke had mocked my art supplies in college and later repeated Grant's jokes about my little drawing hobby. Now she was publicly devoted to an author she did not realize was me. I turned away for a second so Sophie would not see my smile. Then I knelt in front of her and explained that I needed her help. Sometimes adults make simple things complicated, I told her. I am not ready for everyone to know yet. Can this stay between us for a little while? She asked why. And I gave her the most honest answer I could without placing adult resentment on a child. I told her that privacy mattered to me and that I wanted to choose the time and place where the truth became public. She considered that carefully, then held out her pinky. Pinky promise. I wrapped mine around hers. Pinky promise. We spent the rest of the afternoon drawing. Sophie had genuine talent, not just the enthusiasm children often have, but a strong instinct for shape and color. Her lines were confident. She noticed details. When she made a mistake, she tried to understand it, instead of scribbling over the page. At 5 o'clock, Grant came to pick her up. For once, he rang the bell instead of honking from the curb. When I opened the door, he looked at me longer than usual. "You look different," he said. I had not changed anything dramatic. I was simply sleeping better, working without interruption, and no longer arranging my face around his moods. "I'm doing well," I replied. Sophie hugged me tightly and asked whether she could come back the following weekend. I said yes. Grant thanked me with an awkwardness that suggested he was not used to needing anything from me after deciding I had nothing to offer. He still had no idea who I was. That night, I stood by the windows and looked across the city. 2 weeks later, a major literary gala would be held downtown. E.L. Hart had been invited as one of the featured authors. I usually avoided public appearances. Privacy had allowed me to separate the work from my personal life, and for years I preferred it that way. But hiding had begun to feel different after the divorce. It no longer felt like privacy alone. It felt like I was still making myself smaller so that other people could remain comfortable in their assumptions. I called my agent, Natalie, and told her to confirm my appearance for the 23rd. There was a long pause before she asked, "You mean publicly? In person?" I said yes. She reminded me that I had not made a major public appearance in 3 years. "I know," I told her. "It feels like the right time." The 2 weeks before the gala were calmer than I expected. Grant asked me to watch Sophie 3 more times, and each time I agreed. Brooke was always unavailable for reasons that sounded important only to her: appointments, lunches, social plans, personal errands. She had stepped into my old life as if it were a costume she had been waiting years to wear, but she did not seem interested in the parts that required patience or responsibility. Sophie and I developed a routine. She would arrive on Saturday mornings, still half asleep, help me make breakfast, and then spend hours in my studio. I taught her how to sketch lightly before committing to a darker line, how to build color in layers, and how to think about the direction of light. She absorbed everything with the seriousness of someone much older. One afternoon, she asked why I knew so much about drawing if other artists illustrated many of my books. I explained that writing for children was visual work, even when I was not creating every final image. I had to understand composition, pacing, color, and the way pictures carried emotion between sentences. "I work closely with illustrators," I told her. "To collaborate well, I need to understand their language." Sophie nodded and said, "That's smart," with such sincere approval that I laughed. Grant had lived beside the same work for years and dismissed it as play. A 6-year-old understood within an afternoon that skill could exist behind something joyful. On the Wednesday before the gala, Natalie called and asked whether I was sitting down. The streaming platform had revised its offer. Instead of the smaller preliminary agreement, it was prepared to pay $2 million for full adaptation rights, with 3 seasons guaranteed if production milestones were met. I sat on the edge of the couch and asked her to repeat the number. $2 million, she said. For several seconds, I could not speak. The money represented more than a contract. It held 6 years of late nights, revisions, rejected drafts, quiet breakthroughs, and mornings when Grant walked past me without noticing that I had been awake working before sunrise. He had ended our marriage because he thought I lacked ambition. Meanwhile, I had created a future neither of us could have imagined when I began. The following Friday, Sophie arrived quieter than usual. While I poured pancake batter into the pan, I asked what was wrong. She said Grant and Brooke had been fighting about money. Grant had always presented himself as financially controlled and professionally secure, so the admission caught my attention, but I did not question her for details. A child should never be made into a source of intelligence about adult conflict. Instead, I asked how the arguing made her feel. She shrugged and said she wanted them to stop yelling. I pulled her into a hug and told her that adults did not always handle stress well, but their arguments were not her fault and never would be. Later, while Sophie colored at the table, I checked social media. Promotion for the gala was everywhere. Posts announced E.L. Hart's first major public appearance in 3 years. Readers were speculating about why I had stayed private, what I looked like in person, and whether I would discuss the adaptation. Then I found Brooke's account. She had posted a photograph of my books stacked neatly on the coffee table in my former living room. Her caption read, "Cannot wait for the gala next week. E.L. Hart is my favorite author. I own every book." In the profile picture, she was smiling in my old kitchen with the confidence of someone certain she had inherited the better version of my life. I took a screenshot and saved it, not because I planned to use it against her, but because the irony felt almost impossible to believe. On Monday, Natalie sent the schedule: red carpet at 7:30, panel at 8, and signing afterward. The next afternoon, Grant called because Brooke had gala tickets and wanted him to attend. Could I keep Sophie overnight? The timing was almost absurd. Of course, I said. Thanks. I owe you, he replied, unaware that I wanted nothing from him. The day before the event, I spent $1,800 at a high-end salon and bought an understated black silk gown. In the mirror, I did not see a new woman. I saw the woman who had always been there, finally allowing herself to be visible. Sophie stayed with me on Thursday evening. Grant dropped her off without asking why a garment bag was hanging near the bedroom or why my makeup had been professionally done. Where are you going? She asked as I fastened my earrings. A work event. Her eyes moved to the gown. Fancy work? I smiled. Very fancy. She asked to come, but I told her not this time and promised to tell her what happened. I hired a trusted babysitter whom Sophie had met before, reviewed the evening routine with both of them, and left only after I knew she felt comfortable. At 6:50, a black car pulled up in front of my building. As we approached the hotel, I expected nerves. Instead, I felt steady. I had spent years preparing for the work being celebrated that night. The only new part was allowing people to see the person behind it. The gala filled one of the most prestigious hotel ballrooms downtown. Cameras lined the entrance, and flashes began the moment I stepped from the car. Reporters called E.L. Hart over here, and for the first time, I turned toward the name instead of remaining safely behind it. I posed, answered a few brief questions, and joined Natalie near the entrance. She stared at me for a second before saying, "You look incredible. Social media is already exploding." I asked whether Brooke had arrived. Natalie checked the guest list on her tablet and confirmed that she was seated at table 14. Perfect, I said, although there was no plan beyond letting the evening happen exactly as scheduled. Inside, crystal chandeliers reflected across white linen and polished glass. The room held authors, editors, teachers, booksellers, journalists, and readers who had traveled to meet people whose stories mattered to them. At table 14, Brooke sat in a fitted red dress with champagne in one hand, laughing with two friends. She looked entirely at ease. She had not seen me enter. I went backstage with the other panelists and waited while the moderator introduced the event. At exactly 8 o'clock, applause rose through the ballroom as the featured authors were called one by one. Then the moderator said, "Please welcome the creator of the beloved E.L. Hart series." I walked onto the stage, took the center seat, and looked toward table 14. Brooke was staring directly at me. At first, her expression showed simple confusion, as if she believed I had somehow wandered into a place where I did not belong. Then recognition arrived. Her hand stopped halfway to her mouth, leaving the champagne glass suspended in the air. One of her friends leaned close and whispered something, but Brooke did not respond. She kept looking at me while the truth rearranged everything she thought she knew. I gave her a small, polite wave. It was not mocking. That made it more powerful. I was not there to fight for status in the life she had taken. I was being introduced on my own terms, in a room built around work she claimed to admire. The moderator told the audience that my series had sold more than 18 million copies worldwide and had recently been acquired for a multi-million-dollar streaming adaptation. The room erupted in applause. Table 14 remained still. Brooke's face had gone pale beneath her makeup. When the moderator asked why I had chosen to step into the public eye after years of privacy, I answered honestly. "It felt like the right time to stop hiding," I said. "I have built something I am proud of, and I finally understand that being visible does not make the work less meaningful." Another wave of applause moved through the room. Brooke still had not touched her drink. The panel lasted about an hour. I spoke about creativity, resilience, and the responsibility of writing stories children might carry into adulthood. I explained that quiet work was still work, that imagination required discipline, and that success usually rested on thousands of ordinary decisions no one else witnessed. Every few minutes, my eyes returned to table 14. Brooke looked less angry than stunned. She had spent years believing I was someone she had surpassed. Now she was learning that the author whose career she celebrated, the woman whose photograph she had placed on her refrigerator, was the former friend she had helped humiliate. I did not have to tell the room what she had done. Her reaction belonged to her alone. When the panel ended, a signing line formed across the ballroom. Mothers held copies softened by years of rereading. Teachers brought classroom editions. Young girls hugged the books against their chests as if they were carrying something fragile and important. I signed slowly, asked names, listened to stories, and looked each reader in the eye. That part of the evening mattered more than anything happening at table 14. The books had helped children through grief, loneliness, school transitions, and fear. Readers had built their own meanings from pages I once wrote in near silence. Whatever satisfaction I felt about Brooke's discovery was small compared with the reality of meeting the people who had made my career possible. About 40 minutes into the signing, I saw Brooke standing alone in line. Her friends were gone. She held 3 of my books against her chest, and as she moved closer, I could see that her hands were shaking. When she finally reached the table, she said my name so softly that I almost did not hear it. Claire, I answered, in the same calm tone I had used with every reader. Hello, Brooke. Would you like those signed? Her eyes filled immediately. I didn't know, she said. I know. She looked down at the books. All this time? I nodded. All this time. Then she said, you never told anyone. I met her eyes. You never asked. The people behind her shifted as the line continued to grow. I uncapped my pen and asked who she wanted the books made out to. After a pause, she whispered, Brooke? In the first book, I wrote, for Brooke, who has always appreciated dedication and creativity, E.L. Hart. In the second, I thanked her for her enthusiastic support. In the third, I wrote, may you always recognize value when it is in front of you. I closed the cover and slid the books back across the table. She read each inscription slowly. This is cruel, she whispered. No, I said quietly. It is honest. She looked as though she wanted to argue, cry, or demand a private explanation, but dozens of readers were waiting. I gave her the same courteous smile I had given everyone else and said, next, please. Brooke stepped aside and did not look back. I kept signing for another hour. When the last reader left, Natalie handed me water and said the woman in red looked as if she had seen a ghost. I explained that Brooke was my former roommate and was now with my ex-husband. Natalie stared, then said, you are terrifying in the most elegant way possible. I laughed. The evening had not required a revenge plan. I had simply appeared as myself, and their assumptions had done the rest. Before leaving, I checked my phone. Grant had called 5 times. His first text said, we need to talk. The second said Brooke had told him everything. The third read, Claire, please call me. I blocked his number. 2 minutes later, a message arrived from an unfamiliar number. I didn't know you were that successful. We can fix this. The wording told me exactly what I needed to know. He was not grieving the marriage he had ended. He was reacting to information that changed his assessment of my value. I blocked that number too. I did not feel rage. I did not even feel the triumph I once imagined such a moment might bring. I felt clarity. Cameras flashed again when I left the hotel. I gave a brief statement about the adaptation and my upcoming book, thanked readers for their support, and refused questions about my private life. Back at the penthouse, Sophie was asleep on the couch beneath a blanket, one hand curled near her face. The babysitter said she had been wonderful. I paid her, walked her to the door, and then sat beside Sophie for a few minutes. The adult world around her had shifted that night, although she did not yet understand how. I brushed a strand of hair from her forehead and wished, not for the first time, that children could be protected from every consequence created by the people raising them. The next morning, Sophie woke cheerful and asked how my fancy work had gone. I told her it went well. Then her expression changed. She said she had heard Grant and Brooke arguing after they returned from the gala. Brooke had been crying and saying I had lied to them. Grant kept repeating that he did not know. I nodded, careful not to reward her for listening to adult conflict. Sometimes people become upset when they realize they misunderstood someone, I explained. Sophie asked whether they had misunderstood me. Yes, I said. Are you mad? She asked. I thought about the question before answering. No, I do not need them to understand me anymore. Around noon, the doorbell rang. Grant stood in the hall looking exhausted. His shirt was wrinkled, and dark circles marked the skin under his eyes. We need to talk, he said. I told him Sophie was almost ready. He stepped forward, but I stayed in the doorway. I didn't know you were E.L. Hart, I said. I know. His face tightened. If I had known, I interrupted before he could finish. What? You would not have left? He opened his mouth, then closed it. That's not the point, he said weakly. It is exactly the point, I replied. If my income changed his regret, then his regret had nothing to do with seeing me as a person. Sophie came running with her backpack and took his hand. Grant still did not move. You built all of that, he said, and I thought you were wasting your time. I told him the truth. You did not think I was capable of more. He denied it automatically, but the denial had no force behind it. I reminded him that he had lived with me for years without asking what I worked on, what I earned, or what I wanted. After a long silence, he said, I made a mistake. I agreed. He added, a big one. I agreed again. Finally, he apologized. I believed he was sorry, but sorrow did not reopen a door he had chosen to close. He searched my face for bitterness, longing, or an invitation to try again. I gave him none. For you, I said calmly, this ended when you signed those papers. Then I said goodbye to Sophie and gently closed the door. That evening, Natalie called to say clips from the gala were spreading, and major outlets wanted interviews. I agreed to consider only those focused on the books and adaptation. Then I asked her to contact the broker for a Maple Ridge property listed at $3.2 million. When she asked about financing, I said I would pay cash from accumulated earnings and the finalized deal. She went quiet for a moment, then promised to call the broker in the morning. The Maple Ridge purchase closed 5 days later. I signed the final documents electronically while sitting barefoot in my penthouse with sunlight across the floor. By the end of the week, I owned a 6-bedroom home with a private library, a bright studio, and a backyard large enough for Sophie to run without worrying about traffic. It was about 10 minutes from Grant's house, close enough that visits would remain practical, but far enough for me to breathe. I hired movers, worked with an interior designer, installed custom shelving in the study, and set aside a smaller room as an art studio for Sophie. It had a drafting table, organized pencils, fresh sketchbooks, and storage low enough for her to reach everything without asking. When she visited that Saturday, she stopped in the entrance and stared up at the staircase. "Is this a castle?" she asked. I laughed and told her it was only a house. She moved through the hallway slowly, touching the walls as though she needed proof they were real. When I showed her the art room, she looked from the drafting table to the pencils, and then back at me. "For me?" she asked. "For you whenever you are here." She threw her arms around me so hard that I nearly lost my balance. "I love you, Aunt Claire." I held her close and said, "I love you too." Grant came to pick her up that evening. For the first time, he stepped one pace inside the doorway. His eyes moved over the high ceilings, the staircase, and the framed first edition covers along the wall. "You bought this?" he asked. I said yes. "With the book money?" Again, I said yes. He stood there quietly, before admitting that he had never known I was building anything like it. "That is because you never asked what I was building," I told him. He did not argue. He simply looked smaller than I remembered, not physically, but in the way people do when the certainty they used to dominate a relationship is gone. After he left, I felt lighter, not because he had finally seen the evidence of my success, but because his opinion no longer changed the way I saw it. A few days later, Brooke appeared at my front door without calling. She wore jeans and a loose sweater, her hair pulled back, her face bare of the polished confidence she usually carried. Sophie was upstairs drawing, so I stepped outside and closed the door behind me. Brooke asked whether we could talk. I gave her 5 minutes. She began by saying she had not known about the books or the money. I told her I understood that. "I thought you were just staying home," she said. "I was working," I replied. She wiped beneath one eye and admitted that she had been jealous of me since college. In her memory, I had always seemed composed. People liked me. Opportunities appeared to work out. She had wanted what I had, then convinced herself that taking my place meant she had won. "You slept with my husband," I said, because her confession about jealousy could not be allowed to soften the choice she made. Her jaw tightened. "I thought I won," she whispered. "And now?" I asked. She looked away. "I didn't." There was no satisfaction in hearing it, only distance. She said Grant had not stopped talking about me since the gala, and kept repeating that he had made a mistake. I told her that was between him and his conscience. Then she apologized. For years, I had imagined what an apology from her might feel like. I thought it would bring heat, vindication, perhaps even relief. Instead, it landed like news from a life I no longer lived. I told Brooke her apology did not change what happened, but I accepted that she had said it. When she asked whether I planned to humiliate or expose her, I said no. Public destruction would not restore the marriage, repair our friendship, or help Sophie. Brooke left quietly. Inside, Sophie asked whether I had forgiven her. I said no. When she asked why I was not angry, I explained that forgiveness and anger were different. "Anger takes energy," I told her. "I would rather use mine to build better things." About a week later, Grant called about Sophie. She wanted longer visits because she felt calmer in my home. He suggested a shared arrangement. I reminded him that Sophie's biological mother had to be involved, and any lasting change needed to be formal, not based on casual promises. He agreed. I said I was open to it as long as every adult put Sophie first. That night, I began writing my 8th book. It was not inspired by headlines, contracts, or the urge to prove anyone wrong. It was about a little girl who found safety in a house filled with light, and who slowly learned that her value did not depend on the people who left. 3 months later, I delivered the manuscript to Natalie. She called after reading it and said it was the strongest work I had ever written. The story was more personal than my earlier books, and readers seemed to feel that before it was even released. Pre-orders surged, the streaming platform increased its marketing support, and interview requests multiplied. Through all of it, Sophie began spending every weekend with me, then longer stretches during school breaks. One evening, while we washed dishes together, Sophie asked whether she could live with me. The plate in my hands nearly slipped. I did not answer immediately because I understood what she was asking. This was not about the larger bedroom or the art supplies. It was about where she felt secure. I asked whether she had spoken to Grant. She said he had told her they could think about it. That answer told me he was not planning to fight simply to protect his pride. A week later, the 3 of us sat at my kitchen island. Sophie swung her legs beneath the chair and told her father, "I love you, Dad, but I feel better here." The words hurt him. I could see it. Still, he did not guilt her or demand that she take them back. He said he understood, and for the first time in a long while, I respected the way he handled something difficult. Over the following month, we spoke with Sophie's mother and completed the necessary steps to formalize a stable arrangement. Her mother agreed that Sophie had become calmer and more focused. There was no dramatic courtroom battle. The adults reviewed what would be practical, documented the new schedule, and kept Grant involved in her life. He began taking her to dinner once a week and continued regular visits. When he came to the house, he remained near the doorway, as though he understood that the home was now Sophie's safe place and not a stage for his regret. My 8th book sold 1 million copies in its first week, setting an industry record for children's fiction that year. The streaming platform released the next installment of my adaptation payment. I accepted a few interviews with outlets that respected my boundary. The work could be discussed, but the divorce would not become the product. Shortly after Sophie officially moved in, she stood in her pale pink bedroom and asked, "I really live here now?" I told her, "Yes." "For good?" she asked. "For good." She wrapped both arms around me and held on. Then, with a seriousness that made my throat tighten, she asked whether she could call me Mom. I told her she could call me whatever felt right. "I want to call you Mom," she said. I nodded. "Then you can." Grant called later after hearing the first week sales number. He congratulated me, then fell silent. Finally, he asked whether Sophie was calling me Mom. I told him the truth. Another silence followed before he said, "She deserves someone who sees her." When I asked what he intended to do with that realization, he said he was trying to become a better father and a better person. It was not redemption, but it was the first statement from him that sounded like growth rather than regret over what he had lost. A few weeks later, Natalie called with a $5 million offer for film rights to the new book. I accepted after the contract protections were reviewed. Around the same time, I met Adrian Park, an executive producer working on the streaming adaptation. Our first dinner was supposed to cover creative direction, character design, and production schedules. It remained professional until, gradually, it did not. Adrian listened when I spoke. He did not wait for his turn to explain me to myself. During our second dinner, he said the fact that I had built my career quietly showed discipline. I told him it had required obsession as much as discipline. He smiled and replied, "Then it also required belief." No one had ever described my work that way. When Adrian met Sophie, he did not try to win her over with gifts or exaggerated charm. He asked about her drawings and treated her answers as real opinions. That was enough. One Sunday, while he helped her adjust a camera in the backyard, Sophie looked at me and said, "You seem lighter when he's here." The words stayed with me. 2 years earlier, I had been signing divorce papers while being told I lacked ambition. Now I was a successful author, a mother to a remarkable child, and a woman building a relationship based on attention rather than assumption. Brooke and Grant separated quietly a few months after the gala. Later, I passed them arguing in a grocery store. Neither noticed me, and I felt no urge to stop. At home, Sophie announced that her art teacher had chosen her to illustrate the school's winter program. Adrian praised her work, and I looked around at the books, drawings, and quiet life we had created. This was no longer a revenge story. It was a rebuilding story. 6 months later, Adrian proposed in the backyard with only Sophie there to witness it. She cried harder than I did. Our wedding was small, and Grant attended, sitting alone in the back row. Afterward, he approached me and glanced toward Sophie, who was laughing with Adrian. "I'm glad she has this," he said. I told him I was too. Then he added, "You were never unambitious." I answered, "I know." I did not need anything more from him. 2 years after the divorce, my net worth passed $40 million. The number attracted attention, but it meant less to me than the life around it. Sophie thriving, work that mattered, and a marriage built on mutual respect. Adrian and I did not compete over income or importance. He respected what I had created, and I respected his work. My 9th book became another major success, and production began on the film adaptation of the 8th. Sophie watched interviews with young actors who talked about loving the story she had inspired. When Adrian asked how it felt to hear the world discuss my work, I realized success no longer felt shocking. It felt earned. Natalie later brought me a $20 million offer for broader catalog rights, including films, series, spin-offs, and merchandise under negotiated creative controls. Financial magazines estimated my net worth near $45 million, but the quieter changes mattered more. Sophie, now 9, began illustrating small projects for independent publishers and learning deadlines, revisions, and professional feedback. One evening, she asked whether I missed my old life. I said no. When she asked why the marriage had made me unhappy, I told her Grant did not see me. She thought about that and asked whether being unseen could hurt more than anger. Sometimes, I said, it could. At a literacy charity gala, I saw Grant working as event staff, carrying a tray of champagne glasses in a black uniform. We noticed each other at the same time. There was no bitterness in his face, only recognition. Adrian asked whether I wanted to leave. I said no. Grant passed our table twice without stopping, professional and polite. At the end of the evening, he approached while we waited for our car. He admitted that he used to measure people by income and visible status. He had believed those things proved value. Now he understood he had lost something priceless because he could not see past his own expectations. I did not comfort or attack him. I simply said, "I hope you find clarity." As the car pulled away, I looked back once. He was not destroyed. He was simply living with the consequences of his own blindness. At home, Sophie asked whether Grant was all right. I assured her he was. Her relief reminded me that closure between adults never erased a child's love for her father. 2 years later, I received a national award for my contribution to children's literature. Adrian and Sophie sat in the front row. I spoke about belief, disciplined imagination, and ambition that grows quietly when no one is watching. I never mentioned the divorce. Afterward, Sophie hugged me and said she was proud. I had reached that stage not by humiliating anyone, but by continuing to build. 3 years after the divorce, articles no longer introduced me as the author who shocked her former husband. They called me Claire Morgan, the creative force behind a children's franchise valued at $60 million. I had refused to feed the tabloids with cruel stories about Grant or Brooke, so eventually the work replaced the drama. Sophie was 12 when the first full-length film premiered. She wore a soft blue dress and refused heavy makeup because she wanted to look like herself. On the red carpet, I pulled her closer and told a reporter that she had inspired the story. The film was about a girl who found a home not because someone rescued her, but because someone chose her and then kept choosing her. After the premiere, Sophie said Grant had texted that he was proud. She asked whether I was proud of him. I thought carefully and said I was proud that he had not fought when she needed a different home. That had required some growth. Over the years, Grant had stabilized his life. He worked a less prestigious job, made fewer grand plans, and became more consistent with Sophie. He respected boundaries and never created scenes. Regret had made him quieter. Brooke moved across the country and began again. Once, she sent me a short email saying she was trying to build a different life. I replied with 2 polite sentences, wishing her well. That was the end of our contact. My 10th book became the fastest-selling children's novel of the decade. By then, I had investments, a foundation, funding arts programs in public schools, and scholarships established in Sophie's name. We were no longer only earning. We were using what I had built to create opportunities. One Sunday in the backyard, Sophie asked what might have happened if Grant had never left. I told her I would have kept writing, but I was not sure I would have grown. Because you were shrinking? She asked. Her perception startled me. Yes, I said. She rested her head on my shoulder and admitted she was glad he had left. The statement sounded harsh only if the pain was separated from what followed. Adrian joined us with lemonade and said he liked the timeline we had ended up in. So did I. At another charity gala months later, Grant attended as a guest rather than an employee. He approached our table, greeted Adrian respectfully, and said Sophie had told him about the foundation. Then he explained that, when he asked for the divorce, he thought ambition meant visible hustle, titles, and noise. He had not understood quiet discipline. I understand now, he said. I replied, I hope so. He thanked me for giving Sophie a stable home, and for once there was no unfinished tension when he walked away. There was only closure. That night, Sophie asked whether she would ever be as successful as I was. I told her she did not need to be. But what if I want to? She pressed. I said she should build something because she loved it, not because she wanted another person to regret underestimating her. Then she asked whether I had built my career because of Grant. No, I said. I built it despite him. There is a difference. Years later, Sophie graduated from high school as valedictorian with a scholarship. Grant told me she had inherited my strength. She gets that from herself, I said. I only made sure no one taught her to dim it. By then, I had stopped softening my ambition to protect another person's ego. Once I stopped shrinking, my career, family, and sense of peace all had room to expand. 10 years after the morning, Grant placed the divorce papers beside my coffee. I woke before sunrise out of habit. Adrian was still asleep. Sophie was home from college for the weekend, and her old bedroom now held childhood sketches beside university textbooks. She was 19 and studying visual storytelling and business by her own choice. I carried coffee into my studio and looked at 14 framed first editions. Photographs from 3 film adaptations, posters for 2 successful series, and updates from a foundation supporting art programs in more than 80 public schools. Financial magazines still enjoyed estimating my net worth, but I had stopped tracking the number closely. It had never meant what outsiders thought it meant. Around 7, Sophie entered the kitchen in oversized sweatpants and poured herself cereal. She told me a professor had asked what single moment shaped her life most. She had answered, "The day I moved into this house." When I asked why, she said it was not because of the size of the home. It was because that was the first time she watched an adult choose peace over pride. "You could have destroyed Dad," she said. "You could have publicly humiliated Brooke. You had money, proof, and attention. But you didn't." I told her I had not needed to. She smiled. "Exactly. That is power." Later that year, we attended Sophie's first university gallery show. Grant, older and quieter, said he now believed ambition was consistency rather than noise. He admitted he regretted leaving because he had failed to understand me. Looking at Sophie's work, he said I had built everything quietly and never tried to punish him. He called that mercy. "It was not mercy," I corrected. "It was indifference. There is a difference." He gave a rueful smile and said he deserved that. On the drive home, I realized the greatest turning point had not been any contract or award. It was the moment I stopped asking someone else to recognize my value. 2 years later, Sophie graduated at the top of her class and pitched an illustrated children's imprint under my company, with research, projections, sample concepts, and a real strategy. Watching her answer investors with calm confidence gave me something deeper than pride. It gave me peace. That night, Sophie hugged me and said I had never made her feel as though she had to compete with me. I told her there had never been a competition. She said, "You just showed me what was possible." In that moment, the shape of my story became completely clear. It had never truly been about proving a man wrong. It had been about showing a little girl what self-respect looked like in real time. I had once been a woman earning $500,000 while being told she did not work. I became a woman who built creative freedom, stability, and a family rooted in choice rather than validation. Money changes, reputations shift, and people come and go. But once I stopped shrinking and treated my own value as real, no one else could take it from me. That was the empire I had been building all along.